150th wonder.
It was one of the topics which came under scrutiny. The 10-ton giant is airborne.
It was front-page news
from the scene of Britain's worst train disaster. Had she fallen, she was expected to be able to fly 8 years ago when he was a soldier in Germany. He met Priscilla Godier.
as the body passed by
Near New Orleans.
We are all part of history. Wherever we are and whatever we're doing, world events shape our memories. And for most of the 20th century, those events were filmed and explained by Pathé. Pathé News captured history in motion, creating a living chronicle of a turbulent century. 1966 saw the rise of a political personality whose actions would dominate a whole subcontinent, Mrs. Indira Gandhi. Daughter of Nehru, the first Prime Minister of an independent India, Mrs. Gandhi was elected leader of the Congress Party after the death of Nehru's successor, Lal Shastri. Born in 1917, educated in England and Switzerland, Mrs. Gandhi aimed to tackle the problems of poverty and a rapidly increasing population. She faced many problems: a simmering conflict between her nation and Pakistan, the problem of Bangladesh, and internal communal strife. She was to win power 3 times over the next 2 decades and dominated Indian politics until her assassination at the hands of Sikh extremists in 1984. In Southeast Asia, an intense conflict between communism and the West was being fought. America had become entangled in a fierce guerrilla war with communist insurgents from North Vietnam who were attempting to overthrow the ruling regime in Saigon. To the United States, the war was a way of defeating a communist movement bent on global domination. After the French had been forced out of Indochina in 1954, Ho Chi Minh had set up the communist state of North Vietnam. The United States, worried by the French withdrawal, started to pour aid into Laos and South Vietnam. Both countries faced internal communist rebellions. John F. Kennedy stepped up military aid to the South Vietnamese, propping up a corrupt regime in Saigon. The Viet Cong, as the communist guerrillas were called, made significant headway amongst the poor and oppressed people of the South. America began to send advisors to help the Southern Army deal with the problem. But the regime had no internal support, and soon America had no option but to send in her own troops. President Johnson, who had taken over after Kennedy's assassination, dispatched the Marines during 1965. By 1966, U.S. planes were averaging 164 bombing missions a day over Vietnamese territory. The war was to last for 7 more years, and over 55,000 American soldiers would die, along with countless Vietnamese. In the United States itself, a rising politician achieved his first electoral success. Ronald Reagan became governor of California. In 1966, he stepped onto the national stage, and so began his long road to the White House.
Not one train turned a wheel in the entire New York transport system. The strike deadlock was complete and remained so when these pictures reached us. The Transit Workers Union had declared total war on America's biggest city. The buses were also idle. By massive mobilization of automobiles, New Yorkers staved off the threat of complete paralysis. TWU stands for Transit Workers Union. Ironically, at City Hall, took place the inauguration ceremony of John Lindsay, taking over as the first Republican mayor of New York for 20 years. Against all odds, he had won the election. But what a situation confronted him. Lindsay at once proclaimed that the transit union had to be fought. 8 million commuters could not be held up to ransom. Negotiations to end the strike got nowhere. The authorities and the TWU were not talking the same language. They were millions of dollars apart. And Union President Mike Quill, in the chair here, was adamant. Dramatically, only a few hours later, he had a breakdown and was rushed to hospital, his life in danger. Evenings have seen record traffic jams with journeys of 1 hour taking 6. $100 million a day is the strike bill for New York. A momentous day for India. In Parliament House, members were to elect a Prime Minister. Krishna Menon was open in his support of Mrs. Gandhi. Her opponent was the former Finance Minister, Morarji Desai. Indira Gandhi is the daughter of the late Premier Nehru, father of independent India. She is perhaps the only person in the country whose election would not split the Congress Party. It was a proud day also for her aunt, Mrs. Panda. Arriving now, the powerful president of the Congress Party, Mr. Kamaraj, a strong supporter of Mrs. Gandhi. Mr. Desai probably guessed, as the votes were being counted, that he had little chance. And when it was time for the result to be declared, Mrs. Gandhi was elected by a large majority. Perhaps no other woman in history has borne so tremendous a responsibility, leading the government of 450 million people. She is a true Nehru, calm and dignified. Mrs. Gandhi is a widow. Her late husband was no relation to the Mahatma. The result of the voting was already known to the enthusiastic thousands outside the Parliament building. Indira Gandhi has the good wishes of most of the world as she assumes her great office. In London, at the Treasury Office, by a most happy coincidence, took place another ceremony relating to the Nehru family. The Chancellor of the Exchequer was host to Earl Mountbatten, India's last Viceroy, and Mrs. Gandhi's son, Rajiv, now a student here. The Chancellor handed to the Earl the British government's cheque for £50,000, donated to the Nehru Memorial Fund. It'll finance an annual lecture at Trinity College, Cambridge, where Pandit Nehru once studied. It will also provide scholarships for Indians in Britain. New York and a lot more of the eastern seaboard no sooner dug itself out of the heaviest snowstorm of recent years than it was hit by another, 3 times worse. These conditions were seen from Boston right down to Florida. Washington never had it so white. The White House itself took on a winter beauty few people have seen before. So did the Lincoln Memorial. Its approaches so deep in snow, there wasn't a single visitor. Among the few people who weren't able to stay indoors were newsreel cameramen, who began to wish they'd been assigned to the Royal Tour. Even the camera lenses were snowed up. Cars and buses were in an awful plight. Drivers wished themselves back in the good old traffic jams. To end this report, an unforgettable view of the capital.
The north face of the Eiger has claimed its 27th victim. Against this storm-swept, vertical, hitherto unscalable rock, a team of 6 alpinists pitted themselves a month ago. 1 man was killed, 5 triumphed. To the dead climber, American John Harlan, the funeral service was solemnly observed at Lysin. He was 32, a mountaineering instructor, mourned now by his wife, mother, and 2 children. Fellow climbers who know the fear that the North Face can instill in the stoutest hearts grieved for one of the bravest of the brave. Against the Eiger, the adventure spirit raised to supreme heroism was personified by the 5 men who returned. 4 Germans, 1 Scot, clawed and hacked their way up the impossible North Face. What they endured, only alpine guides who know the ice and blizzards of the Eiger in winter can possibly imagine. Frostbitten and exhausted, these men are now among the immortals of mountaineering. Dougal Haston, wearing white helmet, is a young man of whom Scotland is immensely proud today. What elation would all have been feeling now but for the fate of John Harlan? His loss partially muted what would have been the ecstatic congratulations heaped on the heroic 5 who came back, Dougal Haston and his German companions. Another page is written in the grim history of the Eiger, North Face.
Wartime memories were revived in Sydney as 1,300 men marched through the city to embark for Vietnam. They are part of the task force Australia is contributing to the anti-communist army there. Australian Premier Harold Holt left by air to visit his countrymen already fighting in Vietnam. The troops ship Sydney was ready to sail. This was the emotional time of parting. The last the men would see of their families and sweethearts for some months. In the front of everyone's mind was the thought that perhaps not all these men would come back. Australians are very much aware that if the communists won the Vietnam War, the red threat would be perilously close. Hence, whatever the cost may be, they willingly contribute their sons and their wealth. There it was, looming through the haze, picked out by cameras aboard the aircraft carrier Wasp, the Gemini 9 capsule safely parachuted to splashdown. And only 3,000 yards from its Atlantic target point. Incredible precision after the 45-orbit, 1.25-mile journey in space. Specially flown from the States to Pathé News, pictures of one of the outstanding adventures in the U.S. exploration of space. Where leaking signaled pilot Stafford to the carrier, "Get the swimmers here." And so quick were the frogmen, there was no danger. Stafford and Cernan were safe and well. After that brief appearance, the astronauts were again sealed in the spaceship. It only remained to get them on board. No man of the carrier's crew will ever forget the thrill and relief as Gemini 9 was hoisted onto the deck. For 3 days, Stafford and Cernan orbited Earth. And though the target link-up was not achieved, their flight wrote one more epic chapter in the annals of space. As we release these pictures, comes this flash from Houston, headquarters of the Space Administration. Pathé News London will receive color pictures of the most eventful human venture in space history, including Cernan's 2-hour, 4-minute walk in space. So, in our next issue, we shall show those remarkable pictures in color at this theater. The Emperor of Ethiopia, with the Crown Prince, was at the airport to welcome his guest, the President of the French Republic, General de Gaulle, whom Haile Selassie received with his unfailing courtesy. Madame de Gaulle was also warmly welcomed. The President's 3-day visit to Addis Ababa was part of his 3-week world tour in pursuit of peace. In the state coach, reserved for the visits of heads of state, the two rulers rode to the royal palace. The President's wife rode with the Crown Prince. In these times of many recently created states in Africa, the historic land of Ethiopia exercises a profound influence over a great part of the continent. Hence, the meeting of Emperor and President, neither committed either to America or the Far East, may well be an important event in bringing about peace in Vietnam. Both statesmen have high regard for protocol and hospitality. Arrangements for the visit were fully approved by both of them. If these distinguished rulers, both in their 70s, bring about world peace, mankind will owe them a debt of gratitude indeed. Flags of Commonwealth nations flew over Marlborough House. It was the start of the Commonwealth Conference, and Mr. Wilson prepared to face demands for stronger action over Rhodesia. African representatives, including Mr. Kapepwe, Zambia's foreign minister, and Uganda President Milton Obote, strong supporters of the pressure group, prepared to hear Mr. Wilson's statement. The conference had already paid silent tribute to Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, Nigerian premier, killed in the January revolt, and was settling down for what has been described as the showdown talks. Then came the shock news. Dr. Hendrik Vervoort, South African premier, had been assassinated. At South Africa House in London, people gathered. The man they called the chief architect of apartheid was dead, stabbed to death as he sat in Parliament. White and coloured alike deplored the bloody violence. From all over the world, messages of sympathy and regret were sent to the bereaved nation, which had lost its leader 2 days before his 65th birthday. In Rhodesia, Mr. Smith adjourned Parliament as a mark of respect. Though forceful in his policies, Vervoort was a retiring man who seldom attended public functions. Many said he was living on borrowed time, for it was at Johannesburg Agricultural Show 6 years ago that he cheated death in one of the most dramatic assassination attempts in history. Though twice shot in the head, he miraculously recovered. This time, fate was against him. While bells rang in the background to assemble members of Parliament, a messenger approached Dr. Vervoort as he sat at his desk. Without warning, the man plunged a knife into the Prime Minister's neck and chest. Minutes later, Dr. Vervoort was dead. Biggest shot in the arm for the American Republican Party, the election of Ronald Reagan as governor of California. By a colossal million majority, the one-time film actor is already spoken of as a presidential candidate next time. Most of the polling stations from west to east showed a swing away from President Johnson's Democratic Party. But in Alabama, Lurleen Wallace was elected governor on the Democratic ticket, succeeding her husband, who had served the full term allowed. Edward Brooke was elected to the Senate for Massachusetts, the first Negro to win a seat there since the Civil War. To favor in no uncertain way came Nelson Rockefeller, retaining the governorship of New York State. His wife's nickname is Happy, and not even she ever had better cause for happiness than when the results came true.
Harold Wilson was proving to be a popular Prime Minister. In 1964, he had led the Labour Party to a narrow victory over the Conservatives, ending 13 years of unbroken Tory rule. Wilson had pledged to undo the damage of what he called 13 wasted years, but with only a 4-seat majority, the government had little room to maneuver. In 1966, Wilson seized the opportunity and went to the polls, asking for a mandate to carry out the modernisation of Britain. The British people gave it to him. As Pathé News put it, Labour romped home with a 96-seat majority. But economic problems had already gathered to dispel the election euphoria, and the government faced a grave crisis. Pay restraint was seen as the only way to improve things, and Wilson acted to keep wage claims down. The situation was to become steadily worse, and in 1967, the government would be forced to devalue the pound. 1966 was the year of one of Britain's worst tragedies. At Aberfan, in a picturesque Welsh valley, a small village school was suddenly enveloped by a landslide of coal and debris. The school was situated at the foot of a huge slag heap. 116 children died in a matter of seconds. 28 adults also lost their lives. A whole generation had been wiped out, and the nation was deeply shocked. The cause of the disaster seemed to be a natural spring that had weakened and undermined the mountain of slag, but causes and explanations seemed useless in the face of such a tragic loss. Aberfan is still a name that conjures up images of grief and suffering. For many, 1966 was a year soured by the deaths of so many innocents. It
flew at half-mast, the flag at Westminster Abbey. not for a statesman or high official person, but for the man who belonged to the people, the man whose loss affects us all, Richard Dimbleby. Colleagues in broadcasting, this is Hugh Weldon, and friends like Alan Melville came to the memorial service. Veteran broadcaster John Snagg. Director General Carlton Green. From the political world, Woodrow Wyatt. Almost everyone mourned. Independent television was represented by Lord Hill. Richard Dimbleby was unique, without rival. Brian Connell of ITV knew him well. The Mayor of Westminster attended for the borough. Pathé News, often side by side with Richard on great occasions, has, like the whole nation, lost a friend. Timbertop School, an upcountry department of Geelong Grammar School, will have Prince Charles as a pupil this summer. The students here cut a great deal of the 500 tons of firewood used annually. At London Airport, the heir to the throne prepared to say goodbye to Britain for a few months. The Duke of Edinburgh and Princess Anne saw him off. As is usual on these royal departures, the personal goodbyes were said in the airliner. Prince Charles's education has all along been planned to put him in contact with the world outside the unavoidable exclusiveness of the family. That policy is now extended, and he will soon be learning much more about Australian life than would come his way on an official tour. He goes to continue his training for the future. At Timbertop, which is based on the ideas of Gordonston, the Prince's School in Scotland, the accent is on the outdoor life, physical fitness plus self-reliance. Companionship of young Australians in the outback will broaden the Prince's outlook, helping to equip him for the responsibilities that lie ahead. A last-minute change of airports for Mr. Wilson's Comet gave his arrival in Moscow an unexpected informality. The Russian Premier, Mr. Kosygin, had to make a 20-mile dash to greet his guest. The normal, elaborate welcome for visiting statesmen had to be forgotten. During his visit, Mr. Wilson hoped to persuade the Russians to buy more from Britain. He also undertook the role of peacemaker, endeavoring to get Mr. Kosygin's backing for a new peace initiative over Vietnam. There was a hopeful air as the two leaders left the airport to start their talks. Not exactly what you'd expect for a bridal car, but they didn't forget the white ribbon when Chi-Chi, the animal world's bride of the year, left to meet her betrothed in Moscow. Like all brides, the black-eyed beauty was naturally excited. For lovesick Chi-Chi and her mate-to-be, Annan, it's a blind date. If the Pandas hit it off, there'll be an 8-week honeymoon. For her flight to love, she got VIP, very important Panda treatment, and good wishes from all at London Airport. After all, who can resist the appeal of a panda, except another panda? And as Chi-Chi and Annan are the only two outside China, it's just got to be love at first sight.
By tradition, election night is a time for letting off steam. London and every sizable town up and down the country demonstrated that Democrats can still let their hair down. Trafalgar Square has celebrated in this way scores of times. As the results were due, things began to liven up. At Conservative Party headquarters, there was gloom. Jubilation undeniably in the Labour camp. For the Liberals, gone was the hope of being strong enough to put the brake of moderation on Labour in the House. Joe Grimmond and his colleagues had fought hard, but as the results began to come through, it was fairly sure that the new Labour majority would enable Mr. Wilson to spurn Liberal support. In Trafalgar Square, partisanship struck a more forceful note. Back at Transport House, nobody thought in terms of water. Ray Gunter knew that the government was home and dry, and it was only a question of how big the majority would be. What with opinion polls and computers to forecast it all, why do they trouble us to vote? barring something very unforeseen, there'll be no change of tenancy in this desirable residence for at least 5 years. The Prime Minister has received the congratulations of millions and the solid electoral backing for which he asked. What will the next 5 years bring? As a previous occupant of this house said years ago, wait and see.
Euston Station, British Rail's gateway to the north and entrance to a new era of high-speed train travel. The London Midland region has gone electric, slashing the travelling time between London, Liverpool and Manchester to provide the fastest service in railway history between these cities. For driver Graham and his colleagues on the express routes, new electric locomotives capable of sustained high speeds will enable them to complete the journey between London and the northern cities in 2.5 hours. The overhead electrification system has cost £175 million. It is one of the most modern of its kind in the world, incorporating signal boxes with equipment that wouldn't look out of place at Cape Kennedy. Passenger comfort has also been given priority with new coaches, restaurant cars and sleeping accommodation rolling on continuous welded rail to give a smoother, more silent ride. From the driver's viewpoint, this is what it looks like up front at 100 miles an hour.
Still with the World Cup, the National Sporting Club honoured the stolen trophy finders David Corbett and Pickles. Henry Cooper uncovered a special treat for Pickles, but it's turkey or nothing these days. The champ had something to impress David Corbett, though, a reward cheque for £1,000 presented by the club to Pickles and his owner for their part in recovering football's most coveted award. America, the Boeing 747, popularly dubbed the Jumbo Jet. The first will be flying in 3 years. Each of the 4 giant engines will have a thrust of 41,000 pounds, enabling the plane to fly higher and faster than most of today's commercial jets. There's room for 490 passengers arranged in rows of 10. That's 2.5 times more than the present world's largest plane built by Russia and already in operation. Germany, down to earth but hardly a conventional mode of travel, the Rotel. It's a luxury hotel on wheels that speeds holidaymakers on their way to far-off places while they take it easy in style. Sleeping accommodation, like everything else on the Superbus, is first class. The Ritz of the Road has been in operation since the new year. Special attention is paid to food by the mobile chef, who makes sure that passengers don't go without their beer and sauerkraut. The Rotel idea could catch on at home. Just imagine going to bed, waking 8 hours later, and discovering you're still in the same traffic jam.
To say that it towers hardly does it justice. It seems to soar, almost 600 feet of it, looking as if it were keeping watch over Greater London. As the Queen came to give a royal signature to the visitor's book, they told her Windsor Castle was visible from the top. A gold brooch in the form of the Post Office Tower was presented to commemorate the occasion. The Postmaster General, Anthony Wedgwood Benn, escorted Her Majesty. The Queen was received nearly 600 feet above street level by Sir Billy Butlin, who has leased the restaurant up there. He presented his son, Bobby. The tower was built to beam microwaves for 150,000 simultaneous telephone conversations and 40 TV channels. Fortunately, there's provision for visitors both to eat and to see. Later came the official public opening of London's latest attraction. The fame of the evangelist had preceded him. For about 20,000 people, Earl's Court was the Mecca on a summer evening. They were drawn by the magnetic power of Billy Graham. To the young, the message of the revivalist was again being proclaimed. Also to the elderly, the halt, and the blind, all answering his spiritual exhortation.
It's a great delight and privilege for us to be back in London again tonight and to begin this crusade on this historic night, because tonight is the culmination of months of planning, praying, and organization. Thousands of people representing every denomination in Britain have participated in the preparation of this crusade. Millions of Christians all over the world tonight are praying for us. They are praying that a torch will be lighted in London during this month of June that will give spiritual and moral light to a world that is rapidly plunging in darkness.
There's a new attraction among the lights in Piccadilly Circus. The news flashed in lights, just as if it were Times Square. The newscaster, as it's called, will be fed with all the very latest from Reuters and the Press Association almost as soon as it's happened. The 15,000 40-volt lights, plus miles of wire, were all set now for the first message. There it was, the very latest on the Cuban hurricane. The newscaster was installed by the Thompson organization, and Lord Thompson was present for the inauguration. Another addition to the changing face of London. Up Park Camp, headquarters of the Kingston Polo Club, stole some of the limelight from the Commonwealth Games when Prince Charles made his first public appearance as a polo player. In a Windsor team, he played against Jamaica Juniors. In addition to his father, several friendly experts on the ground watched his progress and noted that he has the makings of a first-rate player. To the delight of everybody, the heir to the throne shaped excellently. The Duke and his team took on Kingston in the first of a 5-match series, played while the Commonwealth Games were in progress. As he often does at home, Prince Philip played under the eyes of Prince Charles and Princess Anne. Since the Duke took up polo seriously, he has become a star player with a 5-goal international handicap. His backhand is one of the strongest in the game. Windsor proved more than a match for Kingston. Scored now one of the goals that brought them victory. The match was a pleasant interlude while the serious business of the Commonwealth Games went on elsewhere. The magnificent new bridge over the River Severn provides an £8 million gateway to Wales and obvious benefits to industry and commerce. So it was a great day when Her Majesty the Queen prepared to officially open the mile-long span. Prince Philip accompanied her, and Mrs. Barbara Castle, Minister of Transport, was there to see the great new road link put into operation. The royal car was the first to drive direct from England to Wales over the Severn and River Wye. The bridge, a supreme achievement for British engineering, is the most advanced structure of its kind in the world and cuts the journey from Bristol to Newport by 50 miles. Delighted officials and VIPs received the Queen in Wales as she arrived to unveil a plaque to mark her crossing. The 7th longest in the world, the bridge will eventually carry the London South Wales motorway. It also makes the car ferries obsolete. The Queen and Mrs. Castle could not help but delight at the view. It cost 2 and 6pence for cars and a shilling for motorcycles to use the bridge, certainly not costly for a superb addition to Britain's roadways, an addition which is also a thing of beauty. Britain's first nuclear-powered Polaris submarine, HMS Resolution, was ready for launching. And it was a proud day for all at the Barrow Dockyard as they awaited the arrival of the Queen Mother, who was to perform the ceremony, for this shipyard also built the Navy's very first submarine. Despite bad weather and rough seas, there was no thought of delaying the launching of the 7,000-ton vessel. Christened with the traditional bottle of champagne, Resolution gracefully slid towards the water, under which, when she's complete, her crew of 138 will spend 2 months at a time without surfacing. She'll be armed with 16 Polaris missiles and have a range of 2,500 nautical miles. 400 feet long, Resolution has the latest scientific refinements, and her crew will also enjoy a luxury undreamt of in traditional hearts of oak philosophy.
How few outside Wales had heard of Aberfan until a week ago. Not till the slurry heap buried the happiness of this village did its name become known to us all. And today, homes were deserted. There was scarcely a dwelling that was not a home of mourning. The angel of death had been abroad over the land. Out of the hillside, they had hewn a common grave. One mother and 81 children were to be laid to rest together. The little ones were not to rest for an hour or two and then go out to play. It was their last rest of all. As though reproaching the cruel tip that had no mercy for their tender years, they were to lie within sight of it. Wreaths and posies that came from all over the world were laid in the form of a huge cross. It seemed to say that the ways of Providence are beyond the understanding of men and women. No use to ask, why had the children to die? On the threshold of life, life was taken from them. My eyes kept wandering to that model of the school in flowers, the school in which they died. I couldn't help thinking time and again that if the slide had been an hour earlier, Aberfan would still hear the laughter of little children. It somehow seemed right that it should be so bitterly cold, for family happiness has gone from Aberfan. I prayed that the years might pass quickly until laughter and joy return to this valley of sorrow.
Another promise of excitement at Lake Coniston. Donald Campbell with Bluebird in a bid for that elusive 300 miles an hour on water. In support, as always, Chief Mechanic Leo Villa. The engine, a Bristol Siddeley Orpheus jet, is the most powerful Donald has ever put into Bluebird. Preparations now for a trial run as the fearsome power unit roared a challenge over the peace of Coniston water. At full blast, the engine consumes 2 tons of air a minute. Trouble, it sucked in some rivets, damaging the blade so badly it was a write-off. Bad luck, but Campbell had 1 cent for another engine. Mr. Wilson, a momentous summit session ahead with Rhodesia's Ian Smith, prepared to board an RAF Comet at London Airport. With Mrs. Wilson to see him off, the Prime Minister, accompanied by Commonwealth Secretary Herbert Bowden and the Attorney General Sir Elwyn Jones, was en route to Gibraltar and secret talks in a bid to end the Rhodesian crisis. The cloak of secrecy, which had been intended to shroud the meeting, had earlier the same day been torn aside when Mr. Smith was spotted by a pressman at Salisbury Airport. Now the whole world knew. Ian Smith, also in an RAF Comet, was already on his way towards the rendezvous the Rock. There, anchored offshore after a dash from Casablanca, was the Navy's crack cruiser HMS Tiger, destined to be a vital boardroom of international politics. Over the past 13 months, talks, negotiations, sanctions, and other pressures had not been able to divert Mr. Smith from the path of UDI. When he came to Britain last year to meet Mr. Wilson for emergency talks, there seemed hope of settlement. But this was not to be. The London talks failed. Mr. Wilson, anxious that the problem should not develop into a world crisis, went to Rhodesia. His reception was cordial. But even this meeting failed to provide a solution. Mr. Smith made his fateful decision. But Rhodesia lacked the vital lifeblood oil. Her lifeline was cut. Petrol was rationed. Friend and neighbor, South Africa, saw that she did not go too short. At the London meeting of Commonwealth Prime Ministers, feelings ran high. African representatives demanded strong action from Mr. Wilson. Like Winston Churchill, who cemented the Atlantic Pact at sea in 1941, Harold Wilson went to sea in 1966.
Britain was the centre of pop culture. The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and a host of other bands ruled the music scene, and London was the style capital of the world. 1966 saw a triumph of a more traditional kind, England's famous World Cup victory.
None the worse for that little adventure, Gilles Delamere, the ace daredevil driver of France, entertaining a German crowd at Munich. Again, unharmed and thirsting for another smash. For the spectators, it wasn't just fun. Even this Frenchman was not getting away unscathed because seemingly he has a charmed life. He was proving that with well-designed safety belts, drivers and passengers, of course, can live through the most hair-raising crashes. Delamere's a man in a million, but even his advice is use a safety belt, drive carefully, and live to a ripe old age. Another name is added to the list of great aviators, Sheila Scott, taxiing her Comanche to a place of honor at London Airport after her record-shattering round-the-world solo flight. The former actress had covered 28,656 miles. Miss Scott is the first Briton to have performed the feat solo. It took her 33 days, and Air Pioneer Sir Alan Cobham was there to greet her. Pressmen and friends clamored to get close to the heroine. It was all a bit too much for her. During her trip, Miss Scott touched down in 26 countries. Wherever she landed, messages of good luck were daubed over her small plane. They read like the index to an atlas. Tired but radiantly successful, the world champ can rightly claim the title, Great Scott.
The world's most famous four are back in England. It was early morning, but the fans were in force at London Airport. The Beatles offended some folks at Manila, but it was only by accident that they didn't attend an official lunch. It was so early, and the fans had to dress so quickly, it wasn't until now that they could pick their socks up. Manila, some of the fans have broken off diplomatic relations.
The start of the mile of the century at Berkeley, California. And American hopes to wrest the record from Europe centered on lanky 19-year-old Jim Ryan. Ryan went to the front, setting a blistering pace, too hot for the rest of the All-American field. His target, to beat Frenchman Michel Jazzy's world best of 3 minutes 53.6. For an incredible last lap time of 56.3, magnificent Ryan shattered the world mile record, crossing the line in the amazing time of 3 minutes 51.3. Jim Ryan won for America the world mile record for the first time since 1934. As the Germans kicked off, coming up for its crucial test. England looked unfamiliar in their red shirts. A long shot gave Banks no trouble. And what a test for the 22 star players, 90 minutes away from the game's highest glory or defeat. In possession was that all-round player, Sigi Helt, moving into a position spelling danger for England. Banks alert as usual. The West German attack had bite and purpose. On they came again. An English defensive lapse gave the ball to Haller. And that was it. One down after 12 minutes spurred the English attack. No time for lethargy or half measures. They swept into German territory. Tilkovsky cleared, only to put Bobby Charlton in possession. Another fine save. But there was no stopping England. This time a chance came to West Ham's Jeff Hurst. It's the equaliser! England piled on the pressure. Bobby Charlton inspired a movement which, with just a little more luck, could have put England in the lead. A big sigh of relief for West Germany when the ball was clear. Play was faithfully reflected by the score, 1-1 at half-time. But as England kicked off, playing right to left and quickly built up an attack, excitement made the Wembley atmosphere electric. England had to score. And if the prayers of millions could inspire them, surely a goal was not far off. The West German defense was like a stone wall. Again, England launched an offensive. And again, the German blockade could not be penetrated. It's there! Peters has scored! For the Wembley thousands and the millions at home, one thought, victory. Germany would not let up. Then, seconds before the final whistle, agony for England. Weber scored. It had to be extra time. The first period of extra time proved to the full the value of Ramsey's training methods. England began with a vigor and speed astounding after the grueling 90 minutes they'd already played. Charlton and his fellow sharpshooters came back time after time in the Ramsey spirit, believing that with sustained attack, the goals must come. Then Jeff Hurst, cool and collected, had the ball in the net. No, it bounced out. Goal claimed England. No goal, protested the Germans. The referee consulted the linesman, who'd been in line with the posts, and goal it was. England led again, 3-2 now, and in spite of a German attack early in the final period of extra time, Bobby Moore's men had thrown off all signs of tiredness. It was West Germany who were now noticeably the slower team. When only a minute to go, England still had no thought of being content with that one-goal lead. Racing to beat the whistle, Geoff Hurst saw an opening in the defence and achieved the hat-trick. Bobby Moore led England up to the Royal Box to receive the Jules Rimet Cup and the winners' medals. To be here as winners of the FA Cup has often been described as the summit of a footballer's ambition. How much greater was the triumph they enjoyed now. Fashion shows just aren't what they used to be, at least not in London, the swinging city. As the dancers get more with it, there seems to be less of it so far as clothes go, and they don't go far. Buyers enjoyed themselves at the latest show of Carnaby Street gear. Fashion decrees fur for men this year, and funny hats for ladies. Mini kilts are definitely in, perhaps providing the answer to the question no Scotsman will give. Not traditional, but great for having a fling in. Gone are the days of the tinkling piano. Now it's the big beat that shows off the unburstability of the product. There seems to be a shortage of materials. Maybe she knows better. Wonder if they got special clothes for just walking about in. We thought we'd seen just about everything that the fashion world had to offer, but for a grand finale to end all grand finales, how about this? Francis Chichester completed his voyage to Sydney. He made final preparations to leave Plymouth at the end of last August, characteristically with no more fuss than if he were slipping over to France. Already, the 65-year-old mariner was the hero of 3 double Atlantic crossings. The horizon of his ambition this time was more distant. He planned to sail round the world, first stop Australia. Now, from Sydney come pictures of Gypsy Moth's dramatic arrival. 107 days out of Plymouth, Chichester was within a few cables' length of his goal. His passage of 13,750 miles was the longest non-stop solo voyage ever known. Sydney yachtsmen went out to escort him into harbour. A nation of sportsmen, Australians were thrilled by the achievement of the greatest yachtsman of them all. Chichester had hoped to equal the 100-day average time to Sydney of such famous wool clippers as the Cutty-Sark. Though he had more than his share of bad luck, he failed by no more than 7 days. At 65, he showed staying power that would have done credit to an athlete in his 20s. Everyone warmed to Francis Chichester. At the end of an epic voyage, the great sailor was reunited with his proud wife. When Miss Christmases rally round to help Santa Claus, it's a sign that the Variety Club has made sure of goodwill to all children. It's the same every year, and the leaders of show business will always keep it that way. From America came Joan Crawford, making a generous and very personal contribution to one of the best causes of the season. Max Bygraves was there, helping with the toys distribution that Variety Club makes every Christmas to kiddies in hospitals, children's homes, and all places where ill and underprivileged little people are guaranteed a good Christmas. Vanilla Fielding and a host of other stars made sure that the Christmas luncheon would go with the swing. Charlie Drake, Frankie Howard, and Leslie MacDonnell. Bernard Breslau having good nursing attention. Jimmy Carreras, a pillar of the Variety Club. Another one, Sir Billy Butlin, with Jimmy Tarver. The eternal Christmas melodies are heard everywhere.
1966 will be remembered for contrasting scenes of despair and celebration. A continuing war in the jungles of Vietnam and the horror of the Aberfan disaster, contrasted with Britain's stature as the centre of swinging 60s optimism and joyous faces of a football team on top of the world. 1966, a year to remember.